We welcome Flavia Alaya and Jimmy Richardson for our virtual program today. They secretly helped many a fugitive, Underground Railroad in Paterson, New Jersey. And I believe Jimmy is beginning.
Good afternoon, everyone. I most certainly want to thank Angelica, and I want to thank Evelyn for allowing me and Flavia to do this presentation. This is a wonderful story of research. Am I still on? Okay, a wonderful story of research about Paterson's Underground Railroad. The story actually begins in 1974 when, under the leadership of Pat Kramer, when he was mayor, he produced a brochure in 1974. And that brochure was the first brochure looking at tourism in the city of Paterson. And it actually speaks to the Underground Railroad. But it's a tremendous history that also looks at the houses where Josiah Huntoon lived and William Van Rensselaer as how black and white work together. In 1994, Flavia Alaya, when she was a member of the Paterson Historic Preservation Commission, did all the research work, not all of it, but a lot of the research work to get the Paterson site designated as a historic landmark. Then in 96, Bridge Street to Freedom came out. It's a book that was co-written by Dolores Van Rensselaer and Flavia Alaya. It's a wonderful book detailing Underground Railroad story at that site on Bridge Street and Broadway. It's a great book. It's a great read. It may be a little difficult to find, but it's still available.
Can we have that on the screen, Evelyn?
Yeah, it should be coming up.
Yeah, we've got the end of it rather than the beginning.
Yeah, I see that.
Am I still live?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Now, in 1998, Dolores Van Rensselaer and Flavia Alaya produced a book called Bridge Street to Freedom, and it was a detailed study on that site with Josiah Huntoon and William Van Rensselaer. And it's a wonderful book because it looks at the pedigree and the legacy of the Van Rensselaer family and the Huntoon family. That's the cover page. Dolores, she did extensive research and extensive interviews with a number of people to write this wonderful book that, again, I believe it's available. It's available. The other thing that makes this very important, this project, is because not only was Dolores most certainly spearheading the effort to get this landmarking and this designation along with Flavia, but what really makes it very important is the community at African American together, and they rallied the city council, rallied the mayor to make that site a historic landmark. And of course, then of course in 1998 also, in November of 98, it became a municipal landmark in the city of Paterson. Now, with that landmarking,
Jimmy, can you just hold that thought? I'm so sorry, but I'm afraid that we have some interruptions and we are recording this. So please mute yourself if you are on, because we're hearing sounds that
Flavia and Jimmy, I muted everyone, including you, Angelica. So please, Flavia and Jimmy, unmute yourselves and Angelica too. There's some new people joining, so that was that noise. Sorry for the interruption.
no problem.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. So in 1998, the Broadway and Bridge Street became a municipal landmark in the city of Paterson. What makes the Underground Railroad story in Paterson is because of the people, the faces, and the personalities that really made such an effort to to make the Underground Railroad work. It's an incredible network that is not fully understood by a lot of people, especially people not from who are not from Passaic County or from Paterson. I've been told many times that Paterson wasn't very special. It didn't really have any significance in terms of the Underground Railroad. And that's not true. You are going to hear some things that will most certainly astonish you and give you a highlights of the information that Flavia and myself have discovered. And of course, I'm using a lot of the information. My primary jumpstart was the Bridge Street to Freedom, Dolores Van Rensselaer's book. In 2013, there were efforts on the way to build the monument there. And the monument, of course, it was being created, and the architect was Ed Dwight. He has a studio in Colorado.
Next slide.
Yes, thank you. Next slide. Evelyn. Next slide.
Sometimes it's a little slow in advancing.
Okay, I'm going to keep going. And the other thing, what makes that site so important, again, is the monument that was going to be built there. But long before in 1999, the first marker was put there, and the marker happens to be a headstone devoted to Josiah Huntoon, in which William Van Rensselaer is mentioned. I think it's very important that you know that I went to John Franco Archimedes, who is the executive director of the Historic Preservation Commission, and I asked him about see if we can get state recognition for this site. And unfortunately, we were not eligible because of the fact there's no ephemera, there's no building. Now, in 1955, the nearest drugstore, which was part of the Underground Railroad, because it's Josiah Huntoon's home, it was his home. In 1983, that building was demolished. And in 1955, the cupola was demolished also. And the cupola was a little area above on the top of the house, in which was surrounded by glass. And it's a wonderful story that speaks to the Underground Railroad and the efforts to the Underground Railroad agents to move people forward. That happened in 1955 when the cupola. So now we're starting to see modern day documentation that verifies the Underground Railroad in Paterson. In 2013, I started talking to John Franco about about state historic designation, only to find that we weren't eligible because the property no longer existed. But I found out about the Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. And for those who don't know, yes, it is a division of the National Park Service, it is a nationwide narrative spanning 39 states, having 695 sites, and we want to be part of that network. We have a wonderful story to tell. I started working on the application in 2013. And of course, it was my first national application. So there was a lot of problems with it in terms of not staying the course. I started talking about New Brunswick and how that was a dividing line between the North and the South as it relates to the Underground Railroad. And the people at the National Park Service, they insisted that I stay in Paterson. Now, with that being said, we failed the application failed. 2015, I did it again. Now, of course, I was very disappointed at the fact that we didn't get the designation. And of course, in most instances, you never get what you want the first time. So second time around. So the second time around, I gotta say this in favor and to really highlight the National Park Service or the Underground Networks of Freedom. They are so precise, they are so thorough that I really gained an education that I most certainly could have not had paid for. And what else makes it so special to me is not only could I have not paid for it, but it was such an interesting story that I lived by day and night by the Underground Railroad. Isn't that funny? So in 2015, we submitted a second application. And I must say that the first two applications with the assistance of John Franco Archimedes, the director of the Paterson Historic Preservation Commission. And again, we didn't make the mark, and we continue. So, and it takes, in doing this research, it's not like you can just turn it around and fix the questions or fix the answers that are wrong. It takes a lot more research to validate and verify whatever it is that you're saying. And you most certainly have to have a number of citations that verify. So it's not just one source, it's a number of sources talking about the same story and the same incident. 2016, we applied again. Here we go, we failed it again. And again, I'm gonna tell you no lie, I was always encouraged, because they really encouraged me, and they told me that it was very good, but it's just more information was needed. And as more information was needed, I reached out to Dr. Flavia Alaya, and I told her the situation. And I know that she's a great historian, but she's a scholar, and she's the co-author of Bridge Street to Freedom. And she willingly said, she says, yes, I'll be glad to do it. And I said, Flavia, I got to tell you something. I can't pay you. She says, Jimmy, well, neither one of us are in it for the money. So 2019, we started working on our third application. Lo and behold, they failed us again. Now, in the interim of all these applications, they are gathering so much information about Paterson and North Jersey. So, and at the same time, I gotta say this, Passaic County Community College was really entering the contest, and I'm calling it a contest. They were entering it also. And it's unfortunate that they didn't make the grade either. But I was willing, Flavia and myself were willing to work with them. But I think the semester must have run out for those particular students. So here we go with our fourth application. Same information. I mean, no, not same information. The scope of the narrative is widening so big that some of the stuff you can't believe. I mean, and I know that Flavia's going to highlight this stuff, these incidents in the story in a way that will be unforgettable. Okay, come time the fifth application. The fifth application is in process as we speak, and we keep thinking that we're hitting the mark. We think each time we say it, I think that's what keeps us going. We believe each time we submit it, we're gonna get it, we're gonna get it. We believe that, but unfortunately, the fifth one we didn't make. So Flavia, myself, and a number of people from the national park, we sat down and they said, we're gonna write it. Now, I gotta say this. I believe that part of the reason that they wanted to write it or help us, I mean, let me phrase that differently. They wanted to help us is because they saw a widening narrative. And the widening narrative is something that is it's not really talked about or recorded on the same level as Paterson's. North Jersey is, of course, the Underground Railroad ran through North Jersey. And for those who don't know, it ran through, or may have forgotten, that's a better way. It came to Passaic, it went through Paterson, it went through Dover, Pompton Plains, Dover, and Vernon, and Boonton. Now, with this North Jersey excursion and this Underground Railroad route, there are only a few names mentioned, or if there are mentioned, there's not a lot of history to bind it together, with the exception of Boonton with General John Grimes. Now, he had an extensive network, but it was in Boonton, very close to the New York state line. So what I was told, and I'm going to tell this little short thing because it really it reflects about the widening narrative. I'm going back to the Black church in a moment. In the fifth application, we talked about, well, Harry Jackson was mentioned. Harry Jackson was a slave who lived in Paterson, and he was owned by Cornelius Hopper. The Hopper family was and still is probably a very big family coming from Hoppertown. Hoppertown, New Jersey is in Bergen County, and we know it today as, oh gosh, we know it today as Hohokus. It is now Hohokus. Now, there's one famous person in the Hopper family who was a lawyer, but he was a lawyer for the freeholders, and that was John Hopper. But anyway, Harry Jackson escapes the chains of bondage and he runs away. And there are one of two ways he may have went. He might have went up Cannonball Road, which is today's Haledon Avenue. And why that is called Cannonball Road is because George Washington would bring munitions down from the furnaces in Vernon and in Greenwood Lake, or in Ringwood Lake. They'd bring down cannonballs and munitions down, and of course they would enter Paterson through Cannonball Road / Haledon Ave. The second road would be Golfer Road. Now, why Golfer Road is important is because Golfer Road will take you straight to Hoppertown or Hohokus. But going through Golfer Road or traveling on the Golfer Road, you most certainly would have to go through Godwinville. Godwinville is today Ridgewood. That's the original name was Godwinville, and it was named for Abraham Godwin. Now, so in going towards New York State and going along Golfer Road, I believe, and my records and study shows me that he might have been, Harry Jackson might have been helped by the Jackson Whites. And of course, in getting through Ramapo in that area, he most certainly would come into suffering. And there was a particular town where he may have gotten help, and that was a town in Sloatsburg. Now, the town that I'm going to speak to you about, it really doesn't exist. It does exist on the map, but they are the residents and the residents and the municipal people in Sloatsburg are trying to change the name of this particular little black town that was on, here we go, on Nigger Pond. And it is about 7 miles outside, or 7 minutes outside of Sloatsburg. But in order to get there, you would have to travel on Nigger Road. And it is one of five, there were 5 rivers, and I'm coming back. There are 5 rivers that most certainly played a very big part in the Underground Railroad escape routes. And there are 5 rivers. One of them happened to be in Sloatsburg, was called Nigger River, and we recognize it today as the Ramapo. Let me get back on track because Flavia's got a lot to say. In 2014, the city of Dolores Van Rensselaer and the city of Paterson, the Underground Railroad Foundation unveiled the Josiah Huntoon and William Van Rensselaer monument. Again, it was built by Ed Dwight, and this is something that is not often mentioned, but the real and the correct name, the artistic name for that monument is called On Wings of Freedom. And when you see it, either in pictures, you'll see that they have these little extensions on it. So that is just some of the story. Oh, I'll get to this part too. Evelyn mentioned that I was invited to host the 1619 National Bell Ring, and it took place at the Great Falls. And in doing that, they had a bell. There used to be a bell. Those who have visited the falls before the remodeling remember that bell at the Great Falls. Well, that bell was removed during the renovation, and after it was removed and put in storage, they decided not to bring it back. And the reasoning for not bringing it back is because they couldn't find any historic significance, although that bell has been part of the Paterson landscape since 1871. So I asked Darren Bach, the superintendent of the National Park. I also asked John Franco, Archimedes, about having that bell moved to the Underground Railroad site. And on the ground of the Underground Railroad site, it says, "Let freedom ring." Dolores Van Rensselaer and myself had talked about it many, many times about a bell being there. And lo and behold, with the blessings of God and the city of Paterson and the National Park, that bell was unveiled at the Underground Railroad site on October 19th of 2021.
Can I interrupt just a second so you can show the monument? You're on the Paterson slide, and there are a couple of slides ahead of that that show the monument actually. So can we get there?
It's number 2. The other thing is, I'm gonna move away from this because there's so much I could most certainly, those who have heard me talk before, I could most certainly take up 2 hours, but I don't want to do that. Flavia's got a
Thank
very
you.
interesting. Flavia's
All
got a
right,
very
if we
interesting.
could get back to the monument and then we can move forward, I think that would be
Run
great.
back one more.
I didn't want to interrupt you, Jimmy. Are you finished?
It's okay. It's okay. Well, matter of fact, while this slide is up, this is the FirstAME Zion Church. Now, this is the only church, and it was first and foremost, it was founded in 1834, and it was the only Black institution from 1834 to 1865. Why this church is important is because, and quote unquote, it's in the Underground Railroad District, and I have always referred to it that way. It was just a block from the African shore, and it was 50 Godwin Street. And right next to the church was a synagogue, Paterson's first Jewish synagogue. Now, so John Klein, who was one of the trustees who originally, who helped found the church, John Klein, as a matter of fact, he still has descendants living in Paterson as we speak. So he was also a loyal leaguer, and he was most certainly very involved in the temperance movement as well as the Underground Railroad movement. And I gotta say this, the Paterson Underground Railroad is most certainly underrepresented, but what makes it even more special in terms of its geography, it is Paterson's in a valley. It is most certainly the efforts, there are 4 rivers that feed the Passaic. So I'm trying to show the transportation, how transportation worked. Paterson had 3 railroad lines at that time. 3 railroad lines, and of course you had the King's Highway, which was started at the foot of Broadway and went on its way to Newark and New York. It went through New Barbados, which is Garfield and Lodi, Garfield and Wallington. So that's part of the story was John Klein and the church's effort to help the Underground Railroad. One other thing is, it has often been said to me, which sometimes I get debate from other historians, well, why exactly? Paterson was the first industrial city in the nation. It was always very important, and it was always a need for a large workforce. And as Paterson grew, the workforce was more needed. If you look at the census, it was about between 10 and 15,000 people a year, each year, and that's how Paterson grew. It grew because it needed a bigger labor force. Unfortunately, African Americans were at the time, if you weren't a slave, there were very few free African Americans from about 1804. No, even before that, 1804 is the gradual emancipation until the Emancipation Proclamation. And at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Flavia because I think what she's going to say most certainly will intrigue you.
You could keep it for a second on that Methodist church because if you can move back one slide, Jimmy, in narrating it, didn't mention that it's only the second AME Zion church in the state. And it's really gains importance from that. The only other one at the time was in way South Jersey in Salem County. So it gains a little bit of importance in the narrative as we go through the narrative now going forward. When you know that Paterson became was the location of only the second African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. So thank you very much, Jimmy. And I want to thank the Botto House, the American Landry Museum, the Paterson Historic Preservation Commission, past and present, because they played a role, very much a significant role in the original landmarking of the Huntoon Van Rensselaer site. I want to thank all the people who helped us research this, including Bruce Bardaric of the Paterson Public Library and other librarians across the state, and elsewhere who were very helpful. I even contacted librarians in Canada, seeing if we could find any narratives of people who were who were passing through Paterson and left some trace of their passage in the Canadian record. There was a librarian out in Chicago who helped me with a correspondence between Huntoon and his father. So there are lots and lots of librarians out there who are saving this material and providing the resources from which we can work. I want also to thank all of you who are here, because many of you are the scholars who are doing this yeoman work elsewhere in the state and elsewhere perhaps in the country, and are interested in what happened in Paterson because it can connect with what you are doing. And there is, of course, a very material connection with my scholar friends in South Jersey, not only because I'm here now, but because I know something now about the way those two halves of the state link up that I did not understand before. I also, like Jimmy, want to thank the National Park Service because they have, I beg to differ with him in framing how they have responded to our latest submission, which is my second submission. And I think they loved it. I think they are working with it now to add material only because they thought it was so good that they want to put it over the top. So I take their response to the submission we made this year as recognition, indeed, of the national potential for national landmarking. So I'm not thinking that this is just going to be another passage, but rather that this is we're on the brink of having it officially named. Robin Krawitz of the National Park Service, a Ph.D. scholar herself, and one of the scholars in the Network to Freedom, has been working with us to produce even more information than we had. So I'm very grateful to her and to those and the National Park Service who are anxious to make sure that these links between the various parts of the National Network to Freedom or the Underground Railroad are connected. And now you can move on to Paterson. Thank you. Move the next slide, please. Thank you, Evelyn, by the way, and Angelica for doing this. We have the next slide, please. There, nope, I'm not seeing it. It was that image of Paterson that you saw, and I chose that among many images of early Paterson because, number one, it was so beautiful. It was like the promised land. I wish we could see it. Maybe we can get it back. But it's an etching, or excuse me, a print from 1853 that was created by an artist in Brooklyn, which shows you, there's a lot of interplay between New York and Paterson at the time. And if we can get that picture, I would just love to descant on it a little bit.
Oh, man.
There it is. Okay, thank you. So we're looking southeast, and that horizon, of course, is where New York sits, and the sun is coming up. And we're on the western side of the Passaic River. The falls is to the right of the image, and the continuation, the bend in the Passaic River as it continues now south to go to towards Newark is what's in your screen. And that island in the middle is sometimes referred to as Temperance Island. We're on the rise, more or less, I'd say east of where the falls comes in and where Hinchliffe Stadium is now. And we're looking, that road that you see towards the right edge of the picture is Mill Street. And there's a lot of mills, of course, in the foreground along the edge of the river. The Huntoon Van Rensselaer site is somewhere in the background. You can see the bridges that are going over the river. And of course, the Huntoon site, we called the book, Dolores and I called the book we put together Bridge Street to Freedom, because the bridge was so near to the Huntoon site and provided an escape route north. So there in the background, I presume, is Garrett Mountain. And from that overlook, if there were people who were escaping slavery along the edge of the Watchungs, they would have been able to see Paterson before them and find their location and navigate their passage through Paterson that way. The Huntoon site, I can't point it out to you, but it is somewhere behind those white buildings that probably represent the emergence of Broadway. I think we see Broadway going up the left middle side of the picture into the sunrise. There's very little smoke. Of course, Paterson was an industrial city, so I assume that this is early morning and there's very little smoke because the smokestacks are not belching. But Paterson in this era was already an active industrial place. Next image, please. This is, I've got two images on here, of course. One of them is a map and the other is a picture of the early photograph of the AME Zion Church on Godwin Street once it moved there. It started out on Prospect Street and then took over the Methodist Church on Godwin Street. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But what I wanted you to see this map, because it's very early, actually, I think 1833 of Paterson. And it's created by a man named Uzal Freeman, who was an early surveyor and who clearly thought that Paterson was the place to be. And as a matter of fact, he, in addition to being a surveyor, taught kids in the Methodist Church and may actually have taught Black children in the AME Zion Church. And he creates a map here that celebrates, in a sense, the emerging industrial capacity of Paterson, New Jersey, and extends his skill set to make sure that people understand where they can locate their businesses, where they might locate their factories, and how impressive the progress that the city has made as a result of exploiting the water power of the Great Falls. Uzal Freeman also happens to be the father of Alexander Hamilton Freeman. And you can tell from his naming his son Alexander Hamilton Freeman that he was an admirer of that particular founder of Paterson. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
It's up, Flavia.
You skipped one. Okay, so this is the a publication that frankly I did not know about until very recently. I don't know if any of you did either. It's called An Address to the Legislators of New Jersey in behalf of the colored population of the state. It was published in 1841, in January of 1841, and it is signed by some 18 Patersonians. And it is addressed to the legislators who are about to rewrite the state constitution, appealing to them to admit Blacks to citizenship and to voting rights in New Jersey. Of course, they don't do that, but this is a signal that Paterson had this advanced position in the narrative of freedom, you might say, in the whole national narrative. And these proto-industrialists were philosophically married to the idea of free labor and citizenship for all men, of course, at the time, not women particularly. Maybe some of them were women's suffrage supporters, but that's not what they talk about in this essay. I discovered this in a very odd way, actually, because I had not known it until, as I said, very recently. I had not known it existed. And there is a copy of a later version of it, and I think in the Paterson Museum, but I hadn't seen that. What was striking about this is that it was published in Paterson and actually printed on Van Houten Street, and characterized in a recent history of the Underground Railroad, not of the Underground Railroad, but of slavery in North Jersey by James Gigantino. It's called The Ragged Road to Abolition. And of course, now being really caught up in this narrative of why North Jersey should be characterized as so slaveholding and South Jersey as anti-slavery, and this weird contrast between the two sides of the state have been perpetuated for so long, I decided I'd better go back to the current literature and find out what was being said. And James has an extraordinary amount of information about how the slavery is being perpetuated in North Jersey. And of course, we know the statistics. If you're a scholar of this field, and many of you are, you know how striking the contrast is between South and North Jersey in the holding of slaves. But the North Jersey, statistics are pretty damning. However, James Gigantino identified this address to the legislators of New Jersey as written by 18 Paterson Blacks. And I decided to check out all the names of the signers and discovered they were white. And, or virtually all, I think 16 out of 18 I was able to track. There were a couple that I couldn't track. And among them was Alexander Hamilton Freeman, no less, the son of Uzal Freeman, who had been one of the avant-garde of the anti-slavery movement in Paterson in the 1830s. So here we are in 1841, 18 Paterson or Paterson-related people are publishing an anti-slavery document that demands that Blacks be given the vote in New Jersey out of North Jersey, not South Jersey, North Jersey. And I discovered that not only had they published this one, but another one was published about the same time by no less than Alexander Hamilton Freeman himself, an even more virulent decrying of the state's perpetuation of the lower class status, non-citizenship status of Blacks. So that really launched a whole new really movement in the uncovering of this narrative. Because now not only did we have Huntoon and Van Rensselaer, who were working together on the Underground Railroad, but we had potentially 18 other people who declared themselves residents of Paterson and also anti-slavery and pro constitutional rights advocates in Paterson. Next slide, please.
Excuse me, Flavia.
Yes.
May I interrupt you for a moment? I think the audience needs to know the distinction between the Anti-Slavery Society and the Underground Railroad. They're two different things. The gentleman who signed the pamphlet or the bill to go to the legislature were all part of the Anti-Slavery Society.
I know, and I've said that, and I've not mentioned the Underground Railroad yet. I've deliberately speaking of anti-slavery activism before Underground Railroad activism.
I'm sorry,
Because this
I
is
apologize.
1840. This is 1841 we're talking about, and following this clarion statement of this group of 18 white, basically industrialists and participants in the culture of Paterson, we have the publication by Alexander Hamilton Freeman, and here he is in this picture. He is on the bottom left. He is the author of an even more virulent anti-slavery, activism, constitutional rights of the Black population in New Jersey to the same legislature. And I've already identified Alexander, of course, as the son of Uzal, who was a teacher and an activist and a surveyor of Paterson. But let me tell you what unfolded as we identified Alexander Hamilton Freeman. And of course, you see an image of Huntoon there, whom we already knew was a partner in whatever Underground Railroad activism there was. Huntoon's name, by the way, does not appear in either of those documents. But Huntoon is married to the wife of Benjamin Crane, here at the top. And he is, when his young wife dies, he first moves to Paterson, and his wife dies of tuberculosis, I think. He marries Sarah Doremus Huntoon, which is a cousin of Benjamin Crane's wife. And Benjamin Crane is also the father from a previous marriage of Lucinda Crane, who marries Alexander Hamilton Freeman. And Alexander Hamilton Freeman's sister marries Nathaniel Lane, who turns out to be later on an Underground Railroad operative. So you see this sort of integrated family connection among all of these people who are from Morris County, but now they have moved into Paterson and they've created all of this industrial startup stuff. They have operations, steam operations, cotton spinning, tin smithing, steam building of other, other industrial operations and so on. The other partners who are part of the Underground Railroad system, and you can see from this image, of course, that there are others on this page. Henry Lowe is not a member of the family, but he is also a cotton man who is connected by industrial operation with many of the others who are part of this family, integrated family connection. And Darius Wells is another industrial developer who's connected with the other guys in this system. And also you can see down below, I've noted some of the others who were partners as we uncovered the links. John and Harriet Klein, of course, whom Jimmy has already mentioned as among the founders of the AME Zion Church, Black. Henry Hopper, who's also Black, an industrial startup guy. William Langwith, who is an entrepreneur in town, and we'll have more to say about him later. Isaac and his brother, I think it's, I forget his first name, but there are two Van Blarkums who are very active, who are part of the industrial development and the commitment to the Underground Railroad. And Nathaniel Lane, I've already mentioned to you, who is married to Alexander Freeman's sister. So all of these people are now emerging in the 1840s and the early 1850s as beginning to foment this, basically a revolution. They are an industrial revolution, but they're also a personal freedom revolution. And by the way, I haven't mentioned Sarah Doremus Huntoon. I think I mentioned her as married to Josiah, but she was also related to the Cranes. And she is going to be one of the spokespeople for the history of the Underground Railroad later on after her husband's death. Next slide, please. I threw this one in merely because it shows you looking from the Huntoon house over to the Excelsior Mill and the Cataract City Mill. When we read about the Underground Railroad, we heard that the cellars, plural, of Huntoon were being used as Underground Railroad protective sites. And I wanted to make sure that we knew that the industrial development of Paterson participated very actively. The actual industrial buildings of Paterson figured into this narrative. So presumably the people who were escaping slavery in Paterson were being sequestered both in the house of Huntoon at Huntoon's Corner, but also in since the word in the document is cellars, plural, also in the basements of these mills. And we are, I guess, we still keep hoping that someone will do some archaeology on that site sometime and discover any remnants of the archaeology in the basement that is related to this history. The next slide, please. In 1850, of course, excuse me, you jumped a slide, back to the alarm bell. I want to mention Alfred Gibbs Campbell here because although there is no evidence and apparently anti-evidence that he was an Underground Railroad operative per se, that is to say, he didn't participate in protecting fugitives. He was certainly a hater of slavery and a protector of the Underground Railroad operatives around him. He published, when the Fugitive Slave Law was first put out in October of 1850, he decided he had something to say, and he began to publish the Alarm Bell, a newspaper in Paterson, New Jersey, that was fiercely, fiercely anti-slavery, and that documents anti-slavery and fugitive slave activism in Paterson. Very circumspectly, but I believe it's possible to read all of this, the Alarm Bell, as a way of stating that Paterson is on the front line of this movement. Alfred Gibbs Campbell has a very interesting place in this narrative because he is identified now in the current literature as Black. Nowhere in the documentation that we read was he identified as Black. He was always identified as white, but he wrote a book of poetry published in 1883 that reads so much like a Black man's poetry that the African-American poetry tradition has adopted him into their canon, and he is now identified as an African-American poet. It's really a vexed question whether he was racially identified at all correctly by that identification of him as a Black poet, but he certainly was as fierce as Frederick Douglass ever was in his opposition to slavery. He didn't have Douglass's voice, but he actually published a statement against against July the 4th, as the 4th of July, before Frederick Douglass did, in the Alarm Bell. Next slide, please. This is an image that I cropped from a book about the First National Bank of Passaic County centennial. It's the only good image I could find of what's referred to as the old bank building. And it appears that this building was used for the meetings of Underground Railroad operatives. It's referred to frequently in the literature that we've been able to uncover as the old bank building. And guess what? It's still there. And it is the only one that's still there. We'll come back to that in a minute. Let's move on to the next slide, please. This is the census page from the 1860 census that shows William Van Rensselaer as living with Josiah Huntoon and Sarah Huntoon. And by the way, while I have a chance to speak about household, because censuses really do tell us about households, let's remind ourselves of the role of the women in this project of the Underground Railroad. They seldom get noticed, even by the guys who are recording the Underground Railroad in the 19th century. And that includes William Nelson, who is an historian, who, by the way, is related to Sarah Doremus and Sarah Doremus Huntoon. And we are looking at a Victorian household here where there's lots of kids, there's lots of rooms, there's lots of stuff to take care of. This is a Victorian house. Sarah Doremus would have been the so-called angel in the house. She would have been the wife, you know, protector of the interior life of the family, et cetera, et cetera. And she, like so many of the other women in this history, are actually protecting fugitives, bringing them into their homes, caring for them, feeding them, clothing them, bathing them, sending them on their way when they're safe, they have safe cover. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is for us now to recognize the role of women in this whole narrative. Let's move to the next slide. By the way, before we leave this slide, just one more thing. I wanted to say that, of course, William Van Rensselaer is on that census record, and that is the basis for the original landmarking of the Huntoon site, because it was the presence of a team, you might say, between Huntoon and Van Rensselaer working side by side that created the narrative that landed us the documentation and the registration of the site on the city register. Because the building was gone, we couldn't put it on the National Register, but we could put it on the city register. And of course, the monument that's there now is based on that friendship. Okay, now we can move on to the next slide. I want to give a shout out here to Robin Krawitz, who I think is on this presentation, and thank her for her work in taking up from where we left off and adding new material from the documentary record. What you see in front of you are quotations from the Frederick Douglass Monthly and the Frederick Douglass paper that actually narrate the experience of Blacks who are traveling through Paterson. And we have, in other words, out of the mouths of people who were doing it, the experience of actually coming through Paterson at the time. And so what the National Park Service has done that we couldn't do is actually get the narrative text from the African-American historical record of the former slaves seeking freedom, fugitives from slavery seeking freedom through Paterson. There are a couple of them here, and there are many more that I don't show here that Robin has come up with. By the way, I just want to say also that we didn't uncover these because I couldn't get access to this paper without paying for it. And I had already paid for a lot of access to a lot of documentation, and I just couldn't bring myself to this to go any farther. Actually, I didn't really know about the accessible archives until much later. That's what this is from. And of course, Robin and the National Park Service have access to everything. So that's where that came through. I'm putting a little check mark here to my colleagues at Ramapo College, because I would love Ramapo College to give us scholars access to the accessible archives through the Ramapo College Library, which I did not have. Okay, moving on to the next slide, please. This is an amazing piece of documentation. I don't know if you could read it. I don't have my glasses on in front of me, so I can't, and they're in my pocket, I think, so I'll get them out. But this is a column from the Paterson News of 1900 that Robin found that didn't turn up in my research of newspapers.com, but did turn up in hers. The station in Paterson was Nat Lane's tin shop on Van Houten Street, and his having been the high sheriff in the county, nobody would suspect him. His honest-looking tin shop was an old rookery, a ramshackle sort of place, and nobody ever thought of watching it, save the brass dog in front of the Moses Tin Shop a little higher up across the way. A dog that kept watch and ward, that was a tin dog, for 35 years and never was known to bark or bite. And his only fault was in the fact that his master Horatio always voted against the Democratic Party. For several years after the writer came to Paterson, that's Oren Vanderhoven, who is the editor of the newspaper at the time, who is the source for so many of our narratives about the Underground Railroad. After the writer came to Paterson, the Underground Railroad did effective work here. Many a Black man and often a Black woman was spirited away in the night in farm or huckster wagons and taken to Goshen or to a well-remembered station owned by an abolitionist in the suburbs of Middletown, from thence to be sent to the next stage and always north towards Canada. The writer found his affinities and always readily acted with the Underground Railroad. Hence, we were not entirely surprised one night when the whole bag of tricks narrowly escaped capture by 3 US detectives who had arrived and put up at the Franklin House. And I won't tell you the whole rest. There's if you want to see the rest of the story, you can just ask us about it. But what he goes on to talk about is the assistance in this process of getting fugitives through Paterson by a guy named William Langwith, also known as Billy Langwith, who had a shop on a kind of a tavern, a non-drinking place, a temperance tavern, if you will, at the corner of Broadway and Main Street. And he was a great protector of the fugitives, who often fed them and sent them on their way. So this is very close to the Huntoons, by the way, and I suspect that the Huntoons and Langwith were very much connected with one another. Maybe you can move on to the next slide now. This, of course, is a 1938 photograph of Near's Drugstore, which is what Huntoon's house turned into in the post-Huntoon era. And David Near, who ran the drugstore, was a colleague of the Huntoons, actually. And then his son took over the drugstore, and they served the community. As the community became more African-American, Near's Drugstore became more welcoming to the African-American community. We understand that there used to be a plaque on this building that was removed for some reason that memorialized the Underground Railroad and probably would have saved this building if it had remained. The cupola was removed in the 1950s, and the building itself destroyed in 1983. I have to admit that I was living in Paterson at the time, but I just lost my husband. I was pretty much a wrecked widow. Harry was a historian himself who had defended the discoveries of Underground Railroad activism in Paterson before, but we did not know about Near's. And he was gone by the time this came down. And I was pretty much a grieving widow at the time, did not take part in the activism to protect it. I regret that now and ask Harry to forgive me. As you can see, the community has already become Black, the Harlem of Paterson. Next slide, please. This is, I'm indulging myself here a little bit again. I'm showing you a map of Paterson, drawn in 1902, actually, right after the Great Paterson Fire. It's a Sanborn map, as many of you will recognize, and it shows the path of the Great Fire through downtown Paterson, destroying, you see where the red line is, that block of buildings, destroyed almost everything in its path. Weirdly, uncannily, strangely, it gives me chills to even talk about it. It spared every site we know about on the Underground Railroad. Huntoons, Langwith, Darius Wells, Henry and Mary Lowe, the old bank building, and all the places on Marshall Street that are associated with the Cranes and the Van Blarkums and Henry Hopper and some of the others. It always struck me as really some kind of a sort of moral message to the city of Paterson that it had to get its act right. I deeply associate the Underground Railroad activism with the next phase of labor rights and labor activism that came along in the late 19th and early 20th century. And it's sad we lost a lot of the Cuestiones Sociales people, the anarchists too, in this fire. But it really did avoid taking out any of the sites that we are that are connected with this story. And finally, I'm going to show you the map that we've come up with. The next slide, the map that the Historic Preservation Commission has come up with. And by the way, again, I want to give full endorsement and credit to the Historic Preservation Commission for pursuing so doggedly this history and making sure that it didn't get lost, even though the trial runs of this Network to Freedom thing failed so often. So now Tim Henderson and Gianfranco Archimede of the Historic Preservation Commission have now marked on the on an 1861 map, I believe, the sites that were associated with the Underground Railroad. They missed one, I think Langwith is not here, but they have the Huntoon Van Rensselaer Memorial in red, but all the other places, or most of the other places that I can recall from the research that were associated with this activism. And at least we will have some kind of documentary record of the really striking participation of so many of the first wave industrialists in Paterson in this very important and critical movement for freedom. The last slide just is an attempt to bring into some of the other unsung histories of this heroes of this story. William Nelson, who came to Paterson in 1865 and became a documenter, a great historian, the secretary of the New Jersey Historical Society, died in 1914, never ceased to tell about this Underground Railroad in Paterson. He is a primary source why we could not get recognition for this city based on his documentation alone. I don't understand, but William Nelson was a precise primary source documentary historian and told consistently all through the late 19th century of the participation in the Underground Railroad. Oren Vanderhoeven is the newspaper guy who told the story over and over and over again. And we have vast, columns of his telling the story of the Underground Railroad. John Brown, the first Republican, the first mayor of Paterson, and a Republican, because the Republican Party, actually he was a Whig, he became a Republican. The Whigs were the startup party in Paterson. And he is, though not on the Underground Railroad, a really important figure in protecting fugitives who were being protected by others coming through Paterson. I've mentioned Alfred Gibbs Campbell, sorry, I spelled his name wrong. Louis Stella, another newspaperman who is a very active supporter of the Underground Railroad. I've just been doing some research on him now. And I discovered what a sad life he had, losing a couple of wives in the course of the period that we're talking about, and probably unable, because he didn't have a wife, to be a partner in the Underground Railroad community that was being supported in Paterson, because, let me just say it again, you needed these women to provide cover for these people who were coming through Paterson. Only William Langwith, who was married for a time, but who seems to be given credit solely himself, not him and his wife, because he runs a tavern and he can offer food and he can offer a place to sleep. He is the only solo man who gets the credit for this Underground Railroad activism. All the other partners are men whose wives participated and should be recognized. So that's my pitch. I hope that we have some questions, and be delighted to take them. And thank you all again for listening through this.
Thank you, Flavia and Jimmy. Such an important history, and you have made leaps and bounds in making it accessible to all of us and to the general public. So we applaud you, and whatever we can do to help further your work, we look forward to doing that. I'd invite everyone, if they would like to unmute their microphones, if anyone has a question or a comment, or would like to share it in the comments. We'll try to read your comments for Flavia and for Jimmy.
Let me say something while we're waiting for questions. The Underground Railroad story cannot be told in an hour. Obviously, it can't be. It is such an integral and important movement that many different organizations, many different people overlap. Example, the politics in Paterson, the family members in Paterson, this distinct personalities, the Industrial Revolution going on in Paterson. So there are a lot of things that make this Underground Railroad work like in no other place in the country. I think I was beginning to tell you that North Jersey is basically pretty much agricultural. Paterson is unique in its positioning and what they do, and what happens here. Yes, there was a lot of undercover work going on, but for the most part, if you were to plot where these abolitionists live, you would see that this is a very close-knit neighborhood of men and industrialists helping each other, to secretly helping many get their freedom. So that's just one thing to say about it.
Thank you, Jimmy. I see that Alice Bernstein has her hand up. So hello, Alice. It's good to see you. Would you like to make a comment or ask a question?
Yes, I would love to. This is the best way I know how to do it. So sorry I didn't do it another way. But anyway, I am so grateful to have been part of this. I came at the suggestion of Jimmy Richardson, and I had really no idea of what I was going to hear. I am thrilled by what I'm learning from all of this. So that's my first comment. And it's a field I know a little bit about as a civil rights historian, but not hardly anything in terms of New Jersey, I'm sorry to say, but I can't say that anymore now. So this is all very new to me, and practically everything that was said is something I learned significantly from. I did want to ask, and I'm excited to do some research based on what I heard today. So many of the sources sounded so very interesting and important, including the alarm bell, what that newspaper was and what it stands for. I look forward to exploring myself.
It's a stunning piece of work, really stunning. It's just amazing.
Well, I am thoroughly amazed and grateful to be. So I want to say that, and I appreciate the two speakers very much. I did have a question about what do you think is the significant pieces or parts that are missing in order for you to get the recognition that you've been going for all these years? Because I'm dazzled by it and I don't know what the missing part might be. And
I
maybe-
don't, excuse me, I don't think there is anything missing anymore. I think the National Park Service operatives have now stepped in to make sure that there will not be anything missing. And they are using their resources now to add to ours to make sure that the documentation is complete. But I really am confident that what we're going through, this phase we're going through right now, is just sort of locking the information in so that we can get the official stamp of approval. I don't think the Historic Preservation Commission would be mapping the Underground Railroad sites, et cetera, if it didn't have some kind of understanding from the operatives of the National Park Service that this was going to get approved. I'm confident of it.
I'm going to
Well,
say one other thing also. May I, one other thing? Another reason why it hasn't received the certification, it's a widening narrative. The narrative is just gotten so big that it must be told by maybe a third eye. And so I think that's another reason, that is another part of the reasoning why it's taking so long.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That this is a really a new angle from which the National Park Service is reading the narrative, this narrative of the politics of industrialization and the labor, and creating a new labor perspective on this history. That's why I think the aegis of the American Labor Museum for this conversation is so important. This is a labor story, and we should remember that.
And relating to that comment, oh, I'm sorry, Alice, were you finished? I'm sorry.
Well, I don't want to take so much time away from others making comments and questions. I just want to be on whatever list I can be to find out how to follow up on this, because I'm really thrilled by it. And I respect the research so much. And I have personal reason to respect the National Park Service for some of the acknowledgement of some things that I discovered that I least expected to come from the National Park Service. So this has to do with South Carolina. But please put me on whatever list you can to be updated about what you find and what you do. I loved it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. And I see, related to your labor comment, Brian Sandilands, who is a volunteer here at the American Labor Museum, has a question relating to the community studies here and the communities involved in the 1828 and 1835 textile strike. So hello, Brian. We'd like to give you an opportunity to ask your question.
Hi, good to see you guys, and it was great to hear the conversation. I mentioned this to Flavia, to you briefly when we were talking in the past, but I'm interested into what connections you may have found in the communities that were involved in organizing the textile strikes of 1828 and 1835, with the 1828 one being the first time in American history that the military was called in to suppress a strike. That would obviously be some sort of very important interracial solidarity between the mostly Irish community of children working in those mills and the African American community. This kind of also hits at some, you're talking about the industrialists as well. These might be occurrences that the industrialists were not that fond of. And then also, it was really cool that Jimmy mentioned about the roles that the Jackson Whites may have played. One little tidbit of history is how the name the Jackson Whites came to be known is a terminology for Black folks at that time was Jacks. So it's like, oh, those are a bunch of Jackson Whites up there. And one of the first strikes in American history before America was a country was of Irish carpenters in the mines in Morris County. And being that the Jackson Whites were part of a mining community, or not the Jackson Whites, I'm sorry, the Ramapo Mountain people were part of a mining community. I'm interested in what roles they might have played with viewing all of this from a labor context. Thank you.
May I start this answer, and then Fly can springboard of what I'm going to say. In the textile industry in Paterson, African Americans weren't really part of the textile industry. Although we lived here, we weren't part of it. And it wouldn't be till 1913 at the labor strike in Haledon, where Hubert Harrison came and spoke to those thousands of people about the disenfranchisement of African Americans. So as far as African Americans being in the textile industry and their participation in that part of the labor force, we weren't there. And Flavia can pick that up from there.
Well, I would like to step back to the strikes that you're referring to, the 1828 and 35, 19th century active labor activism. I'm not an authority on that, but I did read Henry Harris's work on that, and that he may be a source for you to explore on the labor activism of the Irish and the Blacks in the 1820s and 30s. From my understanding of what I've read of his work, again, this is Henry Harris, the Irish and the Blacks saw some solidarity with each other rather than any opposition. I also point out that in my study of the census records of the area where the Godwin AME Zion Church is now, which is known as the 4th Ward and considered Black Paterson, that was very heavily Irish in the 1840s and 50s. And so Blacks and Irish lived side by side and presumably work together in mills, but I cannot give you like a fully thought through historiographical analysis of that because that's not my scholarly area. But I think if you start with Henry Harris, you can work from there.
May I say one other thing about Hubert Harrison? Brian, Jeff Perry has just published a new book. This might be able to help you in answering some of the questions about what you're talking about. It's a new addition to his 40 years work on Hubert Harrison. And the Flavia was talking about the 4th Ward being so heavily Irish. Not only was it heavily Irish, it was heavily Jewish, especially along the downtown area. And this is the phrase that many people almost say that, but it was called the African Shore, which was Paterson's first African-American community along the banks of the Passaic River. So yes, Paterson was it was getting more multicultural, and especially in the 4th Ward, where because industry really flowed and followed the river. So that was most certainly important.
I see just related to your conversation in the chat, and I'll just mention, I see 2 other hands up, but if I could mention, Amy Hopgood in the chat is interested in spinning mills in Paterson, and she asked, were the mills originally or eventually segregated? And I believe in the past conversation, the 2 of you made it sound like they were not.
They were not.
They weren't.
As far as I know, they were not.
As a matter of fact, they didn't want, when I say they, the Irish who came to Paterson in around 1822, they came to work, actually 1824, they came to work on the Morris Canal, and they refused to work with Black people, which is how the Jackson Whites, who were miners, got to Paterson. So African Americans were being excluded with labor on every turn. So it wasn't just the textiles, it was a lot of different things, but they were most certainly very active and useful, and a useful community. And incidentally, it wasn't a big African American community in Paterson. One of the census speaks to about maybe 400 people or less. So it wasn't a lot of African Americans in Paterson until after the turn of the 20th century. That's when it started growing.
Thank you, Jimmy. May I ask, Arthur, Gianti, I see your hand is raised, and Gianfranco. Arthur, would you like to ask your question or make your comment?
I was interested in the mention of the Jackson Whites, which I had read about. I lived in New Jersey for many years before moving to Massachusetts, and I never heard any connection or saw any connection in the writings about them being involved in the Underground Railroad or in fight for rights or anything of that sort. They were very isolated up in the Ramapo Mountains and in Sloatsburg, New York. I wondered if anybody could elaborate on it a little bit.
Well, first of all, for people who don't know, the Jackson Whites consist of 3 nationalities, maybe more, because there were several Indian tribes. But you have the Hessian deserters who were part of it, and you had free blacks. So with that being said, it is obvious that this was a community of people who most certainly wanted to help other people. And of course, just to come out of Ramapo with this, a lot of information, because the Underground Railroad is really, there's a trail. There's an Underground Railroad trail in Ramapo that I have not really researched because my research has really been in Paterson, but I would like to get to it. Flavia might be able to elaborate more on the Ramapo Underground Railroad and that section that the Jackson Whites inhabit. Maybe she can answer some of that question. Flavia?
Me, about no, that's not an area of my expertise. I would like to follow up on the research there, but I can't speak to that area.
There is a, I'm trying to think of his name, but he is a chief with the Jackson Whites, and he is currently, well, we're working with the National Park to do something at the Great Falls. And I can't think of his name right now, it slips my memory, but he's also a Jackson White. And again, there was a small community of Jackson Whites in Paterson along Marshall Street and Bloomfield Avenue. That might be a street that many people don't know, because I had to go look for it and search for it. It's right it's right there at Marshall Street, the second road in off of Marshall Street by the new school. Matter of fact, it is almost at the crossing for the Mars Canal. And speaking of the Mars Canal, the Underground Railroad in Paterson Alexander Freeman was the lock keeper at the Mars Canal. And he most certainly helped runaways or enslaved people escape through the Mars Canal. The Mars Canal runs 101 miles from Newark to Phillipsburg. So you can see that it most certainly was a great access point. There are 9 members of the Underground Railroad on the 9 agents that are on the Underground Railroad, starting in Newark. There's 2 in Newark, 2 in Jersey, no, 2 in Newark. Anyway, there are 9 altogether, and Alexander Freeman is one of them.
I think I'd like to just add to that, tracking some of those routes is going to be sort of, it seems to me, the next phase of this work, because from what I gather, reading those escaping slave narratives in the literature that we've seen now from the Frederick Douglass paper, many of these fugitives were coming through towns. They were coming through New Brunswick and Jersey City and Newark and so on, and making their way to Paterson. So there, we know that Huntoon, for example, had depots and operations in some of those cities, and that he could have used his own wagons to carry, we suspect he could have used his own wagons to carry fugitives north. So that's what one guess. It's a guess, obviously. We have no documentation of that. But there is documentation of some of the paths in the literature that's now being turned up, of some of the paths that some of these fugitives took through towns, through other towns. And I think that might provide another interesting link up. I'm so glad Jimmy mentioned the canal, though, because as he said, Alexander Hamilton Freeman was the lock keeper and obviously had a business operation on Marshall Street. So he and his family members, other family members down the street from him. So he had opportunities, many opportunities to protect fugitives who were coming through the canal route and coming down Marshall Street and temporarily finding, some help for their passage through the Marshall Street route and then into town. So, I mean, there's a lot of this is going to be guesswork no matter what you do, but the more we turn up, the more we turn up.
If I can say one other thing, and then Arthur can finish this question. There's one other
I
thing
think we
need to
have
say.
2 more questions
All right, I'll
to
let mine
direct
go.
to you.
Three more.
Well, 3
Never
more.
mind.
I see
More questions.
Gloria has her
Yes.
hand raised. And may I ask, if you will kindly be patient, Gloria, may I ask John Franco Archimedes, who is very knowledgeable, important, hardworking figure in the historic preservation field in the city of Paterson. John Franco, thank you for your work. And would you like to make a comment or have a question at this time?
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Oh, great. I'm attending by telephone from New York City this afternoon. I apologize if my battery dies here in a moment, but primarily I'd like to add another voice to of gratitude to the 2 presenters today, and my personal thanks for their friendship and their tutelage over the years that I've known both of them. In our association and our journey in Paterson would not be as rich for myself and for the commission and for others that know and love both of them exactly for their passion in this depth of work. And this is really an amazing amount of work and collection of work that will really serve as a springboard for much more to come. And we're all very excited, not only for this moment, I think, but also for the moment in time that we're in with regard to celebrating the untold stories of African Americans in our culture in general. And I'm very grateful to be part of that during my career in Paterson. So I want to say thank you on a personal level and also on a professional level to both of them. I was able to join in and listen to the presentation. I've been looking forward to it after being on the kind of outskirts of the process that they described. And finally, I would just like to say that I want to add some bolster, some of what Flavia noted about the NPS designation after all the doggedness that it's taken to come to this moment. I also feel strongly that it's not a matter of, it's more of a matter of timing and when the gate will open for this designation to be bestowed. And finally,
Thank you.
Finally, and I think it's right around the corner, actually. So I think we can, we'll have a great moment of celebration for that. And again, with many, many thanks for the work that it took to get this far. This is a great and complicated story, and not just in the story itself, but also the contemporary story that Jimmy started with. And we have to appreciate the community members and everyone else who participated, our civic leaders over the years, in all communities in Paterson. We have a diverse community, and there are a lot of folks who are not African American as well, who are been very invested and interested in this story, just like in the in the actual historical context that we just heard about. But what I wanted to finish with is that we have now, the possibility of really creating some firm designations based on this research, not only locally, but I think we can explore and get back to looking at possibly discussing this with the state for larger kind of context of the Underground Railroad, as this documentation has really provided sort of the kind of ground for. And I want to remind everyone that we have in Paterson 3 large historic districts that we've been generation. And all three of them are on the federal, state, and local registers of historic places. And they started with a designation on the at the federal level, with federal recognition and state recognition right on their heels. And curiously enough, sometimes the local designations take longer. There's a lot of reasons for that. It's complicated at a local level, and it has a lot more implication and significance in a lot of ways at a local level of designation. So I want everyone to have faith that the national designation has come first for really all of our historic districts, and it's followed up by the municipal designations. So I'd like to say that out, send that out to Jimmy as well, to say, thanks for keeping the faith and putting this time in. And I think we can really get to work on the municipal designations after the federal, it kind of comes to us. So those are my comments. And again, I say thank you, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you, Gianfranco. Thank you.
Thank you. And Gloria, I see your hand is raised. And may I just say before you ask your question, if anyone has a question and like to put it in the chat, they're welcome to. I see Wendy asks, can she do that because it's challenging for her to speak clearly, and anyone is welcome to put a question into the chat. And Gloria, please take the floor and pose your question or comment.
I mostly have a comment. I'm sorry that I missed the beginning, so this may be a repeat, but I was attracted to this excellent program today by the article in the Bergen Record on Thursday. And it's a wonderful article, and it has some great pictures, especially I see historian Jimmy Richardson standing next to the Freedom Bell, which is right across from Passaic Community College, and a monument also in sculptural group. And it's just really a Freedom Bell. It's really a wonderful article. And whatever else attracted me to it is that you may have already introduced Dolores Van Rensselaer, but she and I worked together at the New Jersey Commission for the Blind in Paterson. And at lunch hour, she used to go out and do all this research. And so I don't know whether she was already introduced before, because I missed the beginning, and it was very nice to be reconnected with her. And I'm glad that she continued in her research, and it came to a wonderful program like this. She's the great granddaughter of William.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Of the figure who
Yes.
appears in the census record. Yeah, that's how we landmarked the site
Right.
in 1996. Yeah.
Right.
By the way, the publication of the book was in 1998. The landmarking of the site as a city site was in 1996. In case you needed those
Right.
dates. And
I hope this is taught in the school systems, especially in Paterson. I mean, it's such a positive history.
yeah, I hope so
Well,
too.
there's an effort to expand the narrative within the city. I'm trying to, well, that's another reason for the Freedom Bell, not just as part of, it's not just a bell, it's a way to connect to the past by people having an active part in ringing the bell. So I'm getting more and more calls about speaking to people in organizations about Paterson's Underground Railroad. But like in all things, it takes time for it to catch on, but it also takes time for people to put it in an agenda where it can be consumed by young people.
May I add to that point that the whole educational system since the 19th century, the education of the young has been a commitment of these operatives, the same operatives in the Underground Railroad. We had Uzal Freeman, we had Josiah Huntoon himself, who was Board of Education, and so many others of the families who were connected with actually and William Nelson and so on, who were part of the process of assuring that young children in Paterson got this story. Why they dropped the ball, or Paterson has dropped the ball, if they have dropped the ball since then, is a mystery to me, because I don't know the story. But the early era of transmission of this story is through the schools.
That's right.
I've read so many school texts about this story that it's stunning that we have lost it in the next generations.
The last time I
have-
heard of,
Oh, I'm
last
sorry,
time-
Jimmy.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
The last time I heard of a story being told in public school number 10, and Mrs. Rosser was the first African-American teacher at public school number 10, and she used to teach the Underground Railroad history to her students. And we're talking about in the early 50s.
By the way, I see some of my colleagues from South Jersey on this call, James Johnson and Lisa Garrison. I wondered if they might have something to question us about or add to this
I
conversation.
have a question in the chat for you and Jimmy, particular to Fairlawn. Is there any evidence of an Underground Railroad site in Fairlawn at the old Lighthouse Harry Lee headquarters on Wagaraw Road, or at the Dunker Hook, Free Blacks Settlement? These are both sites. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll. These are both sites with an oral history of being locations. There was also an AME church.
That's in Westfield. I mean, Westwood.
Sorry.
Westfield.
AME
No,
Church
Westwood,
on
Westwood.
Century Road. Alan Lutines, Luteins, documented the Dunker Hook site.
Look, yeah.
I've even read about that and a connection to Paterson. I just saw that recently. I'm going to throw in, because I have to get to the convenience center dump by 4 o'clock. But I just want to say this was a great presentation, Flavia. I'm from South Jersey, and I also spent a lot of time in New York. And I wanted to just point out that the Morris Canal actually goes through Jersey City and connects to the Hudson River. So I think this is a really important thing to pursue as
I
one of the ways that people made it to New York City and then were able to continue north.
Well, the Morris Canal doesn't go through, it starts in Jersey City.
It starts in Jersey City, but
It starts
still,
there.
you could couldn't you go back up it?
When you say go back, what do you mean?
I mean, if it starts at Jersey City, it could end for freedom seekers in Jersey City.
Well, Jersey City was called the last stop.
Right.
So you might have picked up after the last stop, and I think there's 2 Underground Railroad sites in Jersey City. So
Right.
you could certainly have gotten on the road to freedom on the Morris Canal, and I forgot exactly where it's at, but there is a book called 100 Miles. Oh gosh, I can't think of that. But anyway, there is a book about it and where it starts. And again, it starts in Jersey City and it goes all the way to Phillipsburg.
It starts in what is essentially Liberty Park at present.
Yes, exactly.
And it's really, really close to the mouth of New York Harbor. It's right in downtown New York City.
Yeah, when you talk about the canals, not only was the Morris Canal important, so was the Erie Canal and the Raritan Canal. They all were very, very important with the Underground Railroad, even though it's not talked about like that.
Yeah.
I see
Your book
no
that
other
Jimmy was
comments or
referring to.
chats. I don't know if, or any other hands up.
Can I
So
weigh in?
Flavia or
Yeah,
Jimmy? Oh,
I see James Johnson has a
James
question.
Johnson.
Yes, how's everybody? Gee
Hi,
whiz,
Jim.
Flavia, thank you so much. And Jimmy, nice to have been introduced to you this way, but really appreciative of this
Thank you.
this meeting. Is really great stuff going on. just a comment or two, and one is in terms of the African American celebration of July 4th and how that whole thing plays out, you know, with over time. I just wanted to point out it is January 1st that African Americans initially celebrate as an Emancipation Day from the Haitian Revolution in 1804. I mean, they, you know, so, and then, and as time goes on, then it becomes August, I think, August 4th, whenever the British emancipation takes place in 1833, all of these moments are embraced by African Americans and celebrated as Emancipation Day. And just an interesting thing there. And I'm really excited to learn about the address to the 1841 address to the New Jersey legislation there, and also Alfred Gibbs Campbell, whether or not he's white or black. That's an interesting kind of thing. And I was wondering, what about his poetry that made him certainly identifiable as a black man? Is he using personal pronouns, you know, our and we?
Well, there's a, if I may answer that question, because I'm not sure about the other one, but I spoke with Laura Rainey, I think her name is, who is a scholar of African-American poetry. And she was trying to psych out the Sherman book, which was the one that originally established Alfred Gibbs Campbell as a black poet. And she said it was something called deistics, which is a term in communications.
What was that term?
Deistics, I think it's called, D-E-I-S-T-I-C-S, which is a technical term for the positioning of the speaker in relation to the audience. And if you read Campbell's poetry, it is very striking that he can take the voice of the black man and represent it in such a authentic way. So I think that's what it's based on, at least from the text. What is the tradition based on of identifying him as a black poet is another question. I wonder, is Glenn Corbett on the call? Glenn was helpful in tracking the original identification of Campbell as black back to the Schomburg Center, and a librarian there who first named him on a list of African-American poets. So there's this now two traditions basically of identification. One, which is, we are not sure what it's based on, that comes through the Schomburg Center's librarian, who may have or may not have had any access to biographical information about Campbell, but just thought his poetry sounded very African-American. And then Sherman, who sort of reinforces that. And now Rainey, who believes that the authentication was based on the voice of the speaker. So that's the only thing I can tell you now on that narrative. I would love to pursue that with you.
That'd be a great paper for somebody.
Yes, it was
absolutely.
There is research on being done as we speak by a professor in California. But anyway, Alfred Campbell Gibbs Campbell was born in Trenton, New Jersey. He is also a twin. I believe, and I've talked to my friend in California, and we both believe that this was done at the time of Plessy versus Ferguson. No, I'm sorry, that came in 1897. But we believe that he was passing. His birth certificate says white. His birth certificate says white, but we believe that he was passing. And it's very possible that he was just so light that nobody ever questioned whether he was black or white, because they thought he was.
That's what you believe, but you have not got any documentation to demonstrate it. And I think that's what we're looking for here, is some way to track this belief into something that we can hold on to. It's easy to believe. I mean, when I read Campbell, it's just breathtaking how he can commit himself to this, to the service of this higher purpose, and take the clarion voice that he can take. It's not matched by any of the other writers, and he's an extraordinary writer. But you look at a photograph, which we have alleged to be of Campbell, and you cannot tell that he is anything but white. And, you know, it's a mystery. It's a mystery. Let's put it that way. And I hope that there'll be some way to take the lid off of that mystery. And I appreciate Jimmy's research into the brother. But his brother worked for the post office, which, pre-Civil War. So, and I think that would have meant he was identified as white. So
Exactly.
it's a very interesting, vexing question and vexed question. But I would love to pursue it with you, James. I
Yes, I have a soldier down here that I'm looking at, William Kelsey, and half the census records identify him as mulatto and half is white, and he serves as a white soldier, and he has an interesting story. But passing is certainly a heavily invested means of survival. At least for, as some people adopt that as a means of survival. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, James.
Right.
Is there any other question or comment? Jimmy, Flavia, do you have anything to add before we close this wonderful virtual program for the day?
Let me just share this last story.
What was that?
Let me just share this last story, and that is
Please.
about McKee Boulevard, South Flavia, down here in South Jersey, which is right over here in what's that area we call it? McKee Boulevard, Flavia, right there in outside of Atlantic City. Anyway, it'll come to me in a second.
You mean Absecon or?
Absecon, right in there in Absecon, right. McKee Boulevard. He was a black man who was a millionaire. And when he died, half of his relatives who had been passing came out the closet. Anyway, that's a great story. But I have to talk about that.
I love it. I love it.
And Dolores adds into the chat, Dolores says, I was raised as white until I found out I had hidden black ancestry, hence my vow to uncover their hidden history. DNA of 44.3% black.
That's so fascinating now that we can do the DNA. Thank you, Dolores, for that. That's so great. That's great. That's
Before
just
we
great.
exit, I would hope that Flavia, myself, and possibly Dolores and Richard, that we could put together or publish a book that is more inclusive to all the information that you may have heard today. By no means could we even get close to all the information that has been uncovered, but we would love to publish this in some form or fashion in the very near future.
Thank you, Jimmy and Flavia. It's been a wonderful afternoon. And on behalf of all of us at the American Labor Museum, our trustees, our director, Angelica Santamoro, our volunteers and staff, thank you all for joining us. Please visit our website, www.labormuseum.net, to learn more about us. And we would love to see you in person at the American Labor Museum. We are a walk from Paterson, a short drive is more comfortable, and to all of this Underground Railroad history. So we look forward to seeing you all in person at some future date. And thank you so much.
Before we hang up, I want to say thank you to the Labor Museum. As I said from the beginning, this is a labor story, and we have to make sure that we keep that theme of progressive labor activism high profile in it. Thank you so much for your shepherding this wonderful event. Thank you.
Thank you all. Stay safe and well.
Okay, bye.
Hello.
Bye.
Bye.
Everybody. Thank you very much for being here. Hi, Eric. So nice seeing you. Thank you.